All right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling female friendships. And you guys sent in a ton of excerpts from Best Friends Forever by Irene S. Levine.
Oh, that's a good one.
It is. Um, Initially, kind of overwhelming, I'm not going to lie. But once I really got into it, super fascinating stuff.
Oh, absolutely. It really digs deep,
Oh,
into like all the little complexities of female friendships.
totally. Okay, so get this. Levine mentions this statistic, that we only keep about one out of every 12 friends we make over a lifetime. Crazy, right? It
Wow.
really makes you wonder, why are friendships so fragile? You'd think with how important they are to us, it'd be a little more sturdy.
It's the question, isn't it? The million-dollar question. Luckily, Irina Levine has some answers. She's a psychologist, and she's been studying this for over 20 years.
Oh, wow. Okay, so she knows her stuff.
She does. And in her book, she really tackles some of those big myths we have about female friendships, like, the whole best friends forever
Oh,
thing.
yeah, best friends forever.
Yes.
Guilty as charged. I've definitely bought into that one.
It's tempting, isn't it? This idea that, like, our closest friends will be there forever, no matter what. But Levine's research, well, it shows that's not always the case, not even usually.
Hmm, interesting.
It is, and she digs into all the reasons W.H. Holloway, starting with what she calls the friendship seesaw.
Friendship seesaw. Okay, now I'm intrigued, but kind of nervous.
Yeah.
Sounds a little unstable. Like, are we always on the verge of tipping over?
Not exactly. It's not that dramatic, but it does highlight how important balance is. And reciprocity. Levine uses the seesaw analogy to show how friendships naturally, they kind of tilt back and forth,
Yeah.
right? Between like giving and receiving.
So there's an ebb and flow. Like, it's not always going to be perfectly even.
Exactly.
Sometimes one friend might need more support, than the other.
Right. And that's okay. It's normal. What Levine emphasizes is it's about finding that equilibrium over time. Like if it's always one-sided, if that seesaw's stuck, that's when you get into trouble.
Troubling.
Well, resentment can build up. It can really strain the friendship.
Oh, for sure. Reminds me of this story Levine tells
Yeah.
about Maura and Anna. Anna was going through a really hard time, and Maura was there for her, like every step of the way, which is great, obviously.
Okay.
But eventually, Maura was just drained. It
Yeah.
started affecting her other relationships.
Yeah.
It's like classic example of how even if it comes from a good place, that imbalance in giving and receiving, it can cause problems. It makes me think,
Yeah.
are there any friendships in your life where maybe that seesaw feels a little off?
Ooh, good question. One to ponder, for sure. And while we're pondering tough questions, Levine also talks about what she calls friendship felonies, like serious betrayals that could really damage your friendship.
Yeah.
When someone violates our trust, especially like a close friend,
It cuts deep.
it does. Makes me wonder, are some betrayals just unforgivable?
I think that's what makes them felonies. I
Yeah.
mean, the psychology of betrayal is fascinating because it's not just about the act itself. It's
Yeah.
also about how we react to it, like our personalities, our values.
Past experiences, even.
Right. So one person might shrug something off while another person is completely devastated by the same thing.
One of the stories in the book that really got to me was about Jean. Her friend Maria,
Mm.
like, totally spilled a huge secret that Jean had confided in her, like,
Yeah.
told everyone.
Oh, wow.
It's like, how do you come back from that?
Yeah.
Makes you think, what are the deal breakers in a friendship?
Right. And I think that's what Levine is getting at. There is no one right answer.
True.
It really depends on you, your values, your boundaries. That's why self-awareness is so important in friendships.
Yeah,
right?
You have to know yourself to navigate all that.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about balance, we've talked about betrayal, but Levine also discusses this other tricky type of friend,
Yeah.
the frenemy.
Oh, yes.
I love that she calls them frenemies because it's like, are they a friend? Are they an enemy? Who knows?
Ah, right.
It's so confusing. It's like that friend,
Mm.
Sometimes they're great, but other times you get this feeling they're not being totally genuine.
You sense an ulterior motive.
Yes. Like in the book, there's this example of Allison and her friend Nikki. Sometimes Nikki's a great friend, but then there are other times where it's like she's just using Allison.
To get ahead.
Exactly. To connect with people, to climb the social ladder.
It's like playing a game you don't even know the rules to. And it can leave you feeling
used.
used, exactly, and hurt. Like, is any of this real? It makes you question everything.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, why even bother with those kinds of relationships? Like, what's the point?
It's a good question. And the answer is complicated, but often. I think it comes from insecurity, from jealousy, maybe even a desire to exploit others. It's like they need to feel superior,
To feel in control.
Yeah, in control. And the person on the receiving end, They're left feeling drained, emotionally drained.
So should we just avoid anyone who shows even a hint of friend-to-me behavior? Like, is that the takeaway here?
I don't think it's always that simple. Sometimes it's subtle, unintentional even. The key is to trust your gut.
Ah, the gut instinct.
Yeah, if a friendship consistently leaves you feeling drained, like questioning your worth, it's time to step back, reevaluate.
Solid advice.
Mhm.
Trust the gut. Okay, so we've tackled balance, betrayal, and the frenemy. Is there anything else that can throw our friendships for a loop?
Oh, you know there is. Levine talks about, well, change.
Change, as in life change.
Exactly. Life throws us curveballs, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes those curveballs, well, they can send our friendships in different directions. It's inevitable.
Okay, I can see that. Life happens, we move, graduate, get married, have kids.
Right. All these big transitions, they shift our priorities, our interests. Sometimes it creates distance.
Yeah, and sometimes it can feel like your friends are speaking a different language, like you can't relate to each other's experiences anymore.
Absolutely. And if you don't acknowledge those differences or make an effort to bridge that gap, that's when things can really fall apart.
Oh, for sure. And it can happen so gradually, too. Like in the book, Levine talks about Kelly and Lauren. They were super close in high school, but then they went off to college. And Lauren just faded out of the picture.
It's a classic example of those diverging life paths.
Yeah. And Kelly was so hurt. Like, what happened? Where did our friendship go?
It's heartbreaking, isn't it? And often what's missing is that communication. Like, even if the friendship can't be salvaged, sometimes just having an honest conversation about those changes, it can provide closure,
Yeah.
prevent resentment from building up.
So it's better to address the elephant in the room
Always.
than to just let things fizzle out with no explanation.
Right, because sometimes those tough conversations can actually lead to a deeper understanding and a renewed appreciation for the friendship.
Food for thought. But even with the best communication, I imagine there are times when a friendship just reaches its end.
Of course.
So how do you know when it's time to let go? Like, when do you make that call?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There's no easy answer. But Levine suggests doing what she calls a friendship audit.
A friendship audit. What's that?
It's about taking a step back, honestly assessing the pros and cons of continuing the relationship, like weighing them out.
Okay, so during this friendship audit, what kind of red flags should we be looking for?
Well, Levine highlights a few key things. First, toxicity. Is there a pattern of negativity? Lack of respect, lack of support.
Ooh, yeah, those don't sound good.
They're not.
Yeah.
Second, imbalance. Is it consistently one-sided?
And if the answer is yes to any of those,
Then it might be a sign that, well, the friendship isn't serving you anymore, that it's doing more harm than good.
and sometimes letting go is the healthiest choice, even if it's painful.
Even if it's painful, absolutely. But
Yeah.
making that decision, oof, that can be so tough, especially if you're not sure you're doing the right thing.
For sure. So what do you do?
Well, that's where getting advice from someone neutral can help, someone you trust.
Like a sounding board, someone to help you process it all, you know?
Exactly.
Okay, so you've made the tough decision to let go. Then comes the hard part. Like, how do you actually end a friendship?
Yeah.
Gracefully.
Gracefully. That's a good word. It's definitely challenging, but it is possible. Levine says one of the most important things is to take ownership of your decision.
Without blaming the other person.
Yes. It's more about saying, this isn't working for me anymore, than you did this, you did that, it's all your fault.
Right. Makes sense. Be direct, but respectful.
Exactly. And honest, offering a clear explanation for why you're ending the friendship.
But what if you're not ready to completely sever ties? Like, is there a middle ground?
There are options. Levine suggests a friendship sabbatical, like a break to reevaluate.
Ooh, I like that. A timeout.
Exactly. Another option, letting it naturally fade if it's not, like, super intense to begin with.
So sometimes a slow fade is better than a dramatic breakup. It just depends on the situation.
It does. And the important thing to remember is ending a friendship. It's not a failure. It's about recognizing what you need,
Right.
creating space for healthier connections.
I love that reframe. It's not failing, it's growing.
Exactly.
Like BUT.
Yeah.
Even when it's the right decision, it's still going to leave a void, right?
Of course. It's natural to feel loss, loneliness. Levine calls it a friendship deficit. I think that captures it perfectly, that emptiness.
Look at deficit, yeah.
Yeah.
So how do we deal with that? How do we move forward?
That's where things get exciting.
Ooh, exciting. Tell me more.
Well, ultimately, the book's message is one of hope, of resilience, ending a toxic friendship or one that just isn't fulfilling. It creates space for something better. It's like clearing out the clutter to make room for something beautiful to grow.
Okay, that's a great analogy. I can get behind that. It's not about losing, it's about gaining.
Exactly. And Levine emphasizes over and over just how valuable friendships are for our health, for our well-being.
Okay, so spill the beans. What are Levine's secrets to building those amazing, fulfilling friendships? Give me the crash course.
Well, that's a whole other conversation, but I think we have time for that, don't we?
Oh, we definitely do. Stay tuned, everyone.
So one of the things Levine talks about is it's not enough to just, like our friends. We got to put in the effort.
Effort, huh? So no more just like thinking good thoughts about them every now and then.
Pretty much. It's like anything else we value. Relationships take work.
Okay, so what kind of work are we talking about here?
Well, it doesn't have to be complicated. Scheduling a phone call, making time for coffee, even just sending a thoughtful text. Little things go a long way.
It's those little deposits
Right.
in the friendship bank.
Exactly. And speaking of deposits, Levine also talks about shared experiences.
Oh, 100%. Some of my best memories are with friends,
Mm-hmm.
like crazy road trips, camping trips, even just a night out dancing.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy. It's more about just making those memories together, trying a new restaurant, taking a class.
Game night.
Yes, game night. As long as you're present, engaged, enjoying each other's company.
It's that quality time, making it a priority, even when life gets busy.
Exactly. Which, speaking of busy lives, Levine also addresses how major life events impact friendships, which, it's a big one.
It is it's like those milestones, they're exciting, but they can also be a little daunting friendship-wise. Like, how do we navigate those changes without losing those connections?
Right. It's tricky because those transitions, like getting married, having kids, they shift our priorities, our responsibilities.
And it can feel like you're on different planets sometimes. Like, wait, you're speaking a language I don't understand.
I know. And it's easy to let that create distance, especially if no one's making an effort. So Levine's advice: be mindful of those changing dynamics and put in the extra effort to stay connected.
Even if it looks different than before.
Right. Maybe it's more phone calls than in-person visits. Or being understanding when plans change last minute. Flexibility is key.
Meeting each other where we are in life.
Exactly. And speaking of those ebbs and flows, sometimes those changes can lead to friendships becoming, strained or even unhealthy.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
How do you even know when it's crossed that line from healthy to unhealthy?
Yeah, it's not always obvious, is it? But Levine gives us some signs to watch out for.
Okay, so what are we looking for? Give me the red flags.
Well, negativity is a big one. Like, if a friend is constantly complaining, gossiping, putting others down, it just creates this toxic environment.
It's true. You are the company you keep, right?
Right, and it's draining. Another red flag is one-sidedness.
Oh, yeah, I've been there.
It's like you're always the one giving support, listening, making sacrifices, but you're not getting that back.
That seesaw is stuck.
Stuck. And that leads to resentment every time. Then there's lack of respect. If a friend constantly disregards your boundaries, makes fun of your values, or talks down to you.
Oh, yeah. No respect. Deal breaker.
It should be. Respect is the foundation, right, of any healthy relationship.
100%.
And then finally, there's manipulation.
Ugh, manipulation. That's a tough one.
It is. And it can be so subtle. Guilt trips, passive-aggressive comments, even outright attempts to control what you do.
So how do you even address that with a friend?
It's not easy, but honesty, open communication is usually the best way.
So, like, you sit them down and say, hey, I think you're being manipulative.
You can, but it doesn't have to be that confrontational. Start by just expressing how their actions make you feel. When you do X, it makes me feel Y.
So focus on the impact of their behavior, not necessarily labeling them.
Exactly. And set those boundaries. Let them know what's not okay and what the consequences will be if those boundaries are crossed.
It's like drawing a line in the sand.
Exactly. And if they keep crossing that line, well, then it might be time to reconsider the friendship altogether.
Tough, but true. Sometimes you got to protect yourself.
You do. Now, all that being said, Levine also talks about the importance of forgiveness in friendships.
Forgiveness. Whew, that's a big one. It's hard, especially when you've been hurt by someone you care about. Like, where do you even start with forgiveness?
It is hard, and it's a process, not a one-time thing. But Levine gives some good advice first. Try to understand.
Understand the person who hurt me.
Yeah. Put yourself in their shoes. Were there any circumstances that might have contributed to their actions?
So, like, trying to see things from their perspective, even if what they did was wrong.
Exactly. And sometimes just understanding that why behind their behavior, it can make it easier to let go of the anger, the resentment.
So understanding is step one, then what?
Then, communication. If you're willing to work on the friendship, talk to them about how their actions impacted you.
So not dwelling on the past, but being honest about your feelings.
Right. And then shift the focus to healing, to growth, and that often involves apologies.
Oh yeah, a good apology can go a long way.
It can. A sincere apology. It acknowledges the hurt they caused. It's a promise to do better.
And on the flip side, if you're the one who messed up, don't be afraid to apologize either.
Oh, absolutely. Owning our mistakes. That's huge, GE. It can be incredibly healing for both people.
Takes courage, though.
It does, but it's worth it. And remember, forgiveness isn't a one-time event. It's a process. There will be setbacks. It takes time to rebuild trust. But if both people are committed, it's possible.
Possible to heal those wounds and come out stronger on the other side.
Stronger. Exactly. Now, before we move on, there's one more thing I wanted to touch on. Levine calls it the economics of friendship.
Economics of friendship.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now you've got me curious. What's that all about?
Well, it's this idea that friendships, just like any relationship, have this give and take. Not just emotionally, but in terms of time, energy, even resources.
So there's like a balance sheet, like we're keeping score of who's giving what.
Not literally. It's not about keeping score or turning it into some kind of transaction, but it's about being aware of those dynamics.
Okay, so how does this economics of friendship play out in real life? Give me an example.
Sure, let's say you have a friend who's always asking for favors, borrowing money, needing support, but they rarely reciprocate. Over time, that creates resentment.
Like one person's always making withdrawals from the friendship bank, but never putting anything back in.
Exactly. And on the flip side, if you're always the one giving, doing for others, but not receiving anything in return, you start to feel depleted, undervalued.
Finding that balance is key. But how do we do that without, like, turning our friendships into some calculated thing? It feels kind of icky, you know?
I get it. It's not about being cold or calculating. It's about being mindful. Is there equal contribution? Are both people's needs being met? Is there respect, appreciation?
Like checking the temperature of the friendship, making sure it feels good for both people.
Yes, exactly. And that means being honest with each other about your needs, your expectation.
Communication, it always comes back to that, doesn't it? Whether it's expressing gratitude, setting boundaries, just checking in to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Always.
Yeah.
Now, here's another layer to this whole economics thing. Socioeconomic status.
Ooh, yeah. Money. Tricky subject. I've seen friendships struggle when there's a big income gap or differences in lifestyle.
It can be tough. Levine says those differences can definitely create challenges, especially when it comes to planning things or even just keeping up with each other's lives.
Yeah. Like, what if one friend can afford to jet set around the world while the other is struggling to pay rent? It creates this weird dynamic.
For sure, it can lead to discomfort, resentment, if those differences aren't addressed.
So how do you address them? Like, how do you maintain a close friendship when there's such a gap in resources?
It takes that open communication again.
Ah, the magic bullet.
Right. Don't pretend the differences don't exist. Talk about them. Set realistic expectations and be sensitive to each other's limitations.
So finding creative ways to connect, regardless of finances. Like potlucks instead of fancy dinners.
Exactly. Or exploring local things instead of going on expensive trips. It's about the quality of the connection, not the cost of the activities.
Because true friendship isn't about keeping up with the Joneses.
It's not. It's about valuing the person.
Love that. Okay, so we've talked about navigating differences, but what about just maintaining those friendships over time, like the long haul? How do we make them last?
Well, that's the golden question, right?
It is. I'm ready for those secrets to lifelong friendships.
Well, one thing Levine stresses, and we've touched on it a bit, is that friendships take effort.
Like, they don't just magically sustain themselves.
Nope. We got to put in the work. Like tending a garden.
Ooh, I like that.
Got to water it, weed it, give it attention if you want it to thrive. And that means even when you're busy, make time for your friends.
So schedule those calls, plan those outings, send those little thinking of you texts.
Exactly. It's those little acts of kindness that remind them you care. And don't forget shared experiences.
Oh, the memories. Make them.
Yes. Travel, take a class, volunteer, or just have a movie night. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as you're doing it together.
Creating those shared moments, those inside jokes,
Yeah.
that's what bonds you together.
Exactly. It creates a tapestry of memories.
Ooh, I love that. A friendship tapestry.
And as we've said over and over, communicate. Keep those lines open. Share your highs and lows. Be there for each other.
Being present. Being that safe haven for each other.
Yes. And finally, remember that forgiveness is key. We all make mistakes.
Holding grudges just poisons the well.
It does. Let go of that resentment, extend grace.
Yeah.
That's how the friendship grows, even when things get tough.
It's like releasing that heavyweight so you
Girl.
can actually enjoy the relationship.
Exactly.
Wow, this has been amazing. So much to think about.
It has.
I feel like I have a whole new understanding of female friendships now.
Me too.
But before we get too carried away, we need to hear from you. What resonated with you most from our conversation? What are you going to take away from this deep dive?
We want to hear your thoughts, so share them with us. And until next time, keep diving deep.
So economics of friendship. It does sound kind of transactional when you put it like that.
Right. Like we're, I don't know, drawing up contracts for every hangout.
Exactly. But you're saying it's not about that.
Not at all. It's more about just being aware of the natural give and take in any relationship, really, but especially friendships. It's not about being like rigid with it,
Right, right.
but acknowledging that sometimes things can get out of whack.
Makes sense. Like you were saying earlier, any healthy relationship needs to feel reciprocal.
Exactly. And when it's not, that's when resentment can creep in. Things get unbalanced.
Okay, so how do we navigate that without turning our friendships into some kind of business deal?
Honesty, open communication, being able to say, hey, I need this, or I feel this way without fear of judgment, and being able to hear that from our friends too.
So advocating for ourselves and being a good listener.
Exactly. Both are crucial. And sometimes, yeah, those conversations might be a little awkward.
Totally. Like when you were talking about money or, if there's a big difference in lifestyle between friends,
Yeah.
how do you even approach that?
Right. It can be tough. But I think, again, honesty is key. Acknowledging those differences can actually help. Yeah, it creates that understanding, that empathy. Like, hey, I know we have different financial situations.
But I still want to hang out with you.
Let's find ways to connect that work for both of us.
I love that. So it's about being upfront, finding those creative solutions.
Exactly. Potlucks instead of dinners out. Exploring local stuff instead of, fancy vacations.
Right, right. It's about the quality of the time, not the cost.
Exactly. Because true friendship, it's not about keeping up with the Joneses.
It's about the person.
The person, yes. Okay, but shifting gears a bit. We've talked about navigating differences, but what about just maintaining those friendships over time?
Yes. The long game. How do we make them last?
Well, one of the big takeaways from the book is that friendships, they take effort. Like, we can't just assume they'll always be there.
It's not a set it and forget it kind of thing.
Not at all. It's like tending a garden. You got to water it, weed it, give it attention.
Otherwise, it withers.
Exactly. And that might mean, I don't know, scheduling those phone calls even when you're crazy busy, making time for those visits, sending those thinking of you texts.
Little gestures go a long way.
I do. It shows them you care. And then, of course, there's the shared experiences.
Oh, yes. Memories. Gotta make them.
Make them. Traveling, trying new things, even just movie nights at home. It all adds up.
It's like each experience adds another thread to that tapestry, right? The friendship tapestry.
Ooh, I like that. The friendship tapestry. And as we've said, like a million times already, communication. It's the foundation of it all.
Being open, being honest, being there for each other.
Through thick and thin, good times, A and D bad.
And finally, forgiveness. That's a big one.
It is, because we all mess up sometimes.
Yeah.
And being able to forgive, to extend grace, that's essential.
But lets the friendship grow, even when things get tough.
Exactly.
Wow. This has been incredible. I feel like I've learned so much about female friendships today.
Me too. It's been a pleasure diving into all this with you.
And to you, our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope this deep dive has sparked some new insights, some new ideas.
Maybe even inspired you to look at your own friendships in a different light.
Friendships are precious.
They are.
And nurturing those connections, it's one of those rewarding things we can do. So go out there and celebrate the amazing women in your life.
Yes. And until next time, keep diving deep.